This is Talk is Sheep, the official podcast of the Wild Sheep Society of BC, brought to you by Sitka Gear. Come along as we bring conversations that matter to you into the high alpine. This episode is sponsored by our conservation partner, Precision Optics. Thank you Sitka Gear and Precision Optics for investing in healthy wildlife and sustainable ecosystems. Well, here we are back in the studio for another episode of Talk is Sheep, and it's been a few weeks since I've been back on the mic, and today I'm super stoked for a variety of reasons, but to start with, we've got Jann Demaske, and Jann, thanks so much, Chair of One Campfire, and I think you've hosted more Talk is Sheep in the last month than I have, so welcome as my co-host.
I think you're right, yep. Me and Hannah.
Yeah, awesome. So you guys are crushing it, and really excited to have you back with us today. And Jann, you're going to be such a great resource for us for a variety of reasons. Obviously, the One Campfire connection and defending our hunting heritage, but then also your involvement in Colorado and sort of the coalface of this movement. I always thought BC was bad, and Colorado's doing a good job of rivaling us. So I guess we could have the anti-hunting war-offs between our borders and see who's the stronger one, sadly. But anyway, you're going to be a great resource for us, Jann, and obviously your connection to what's happening in Colorado, and then the great work you've been doing with Dan as well, and supporting all the great work being done in Colorado. But with that, I'd like to introduce our guest today, Dan Gates, Executive Director of Coloradans for Responsible Wildlife Management. Really the face of protecting hunting in North America these days, Dan. And just really excited to have you on the podcast, hear your perspective. I know you've been doing the podcast route. You've got lots of important work going on right now, and love to dive into that stuff today. Welcome.
Appreciate the opportunity, Kyle, and also thanks, Jann. You and I have worked together on many things over the last 3 years. We became good friends, but I just appreciate the opportunity to talk to somebody out of another sector of our community. And actually, I'll be in British Columbia at Squamish next week, so it'll be cool to try to connect some of the dots on that level as well. But just appreciate the opportunity to have a conversation.
Kyle,
That's awesome.
I actually met Dan the first time at Sheep Show. He and Charles from Howell, and I don't remember who else was there. And I felt very bold, and I just went up and I said, "Hi, I'm Jann Demaske. I live in Colorado, and I have a cool trophy room. Let's do a fundraiser." And Dan was like, "Who is this crazy broad?" And became fast friends. Just, it was pretty cool.
It's inspiring to see what a community can do when under pressure. And, I'm going to fire a bit of a shot here in British Columbia on the grizzly bear thing. We lost grizzly bears in 2017 in British Columbia, and we kind of just stood around looking at each other, waiting for some leadership. And it just really never transpired. And we kind of spent, the last almost decade here getting our eggs in a row and trying to, fight this thing. So I feel like, Colorado, you guys have done a phenomenal job, and honestly, it's a beacon of hope for the hunting community, in my opinion. So maybe, Dan, if you don't mind, can you just sort of jump into, your journey on how, a guy like yourself ended up being the face of sort of defending hunting in North America, sort of, that evolution. And I know there's a million steps along the way, but kind of the Cole's notes on how you got to be that guy and sort of some of the background on it. I know that's a 1 hour answer right there, but
well, and I appreciate it. And while I would not consider myself the face of anything, even though I have my face on a shirt that I did not put on there, our team did that during the 127 campaign. That's a conversation for another day, but we sold a lot of them. So I don't know if people were using them for target practice or what, but we started the Coloradans for Responsible Wildlife Management back in 2016 in preparation for the onslaught of stuff that we probably thought was going to happen once we had a new gubernatorial administration in the state of Colorado. And I've been playing and fighting in this arena since about 2002 in some capacity, and then really elevated it about 2008. So it's been like 18, 19 years on the hard side of it. I'm also the president for the Colorado Trappers and Predator Hunters Association. I've been appointed by the last two governors of the state of Colorado, neither one of which I ever voted for. I've been chairs of multiple organizations and commissions and boards and committees in charge of millions of dollars of sportsman revenue to be able to turn around and provide conservation easements and fee title acquisitions. And also I was the chair of the Colorado Wildlife Council, which is only one of 2 councils in the entire country, the other being in Michigan. And I didn't sign up for this like Horseshack on Welcome Back Kotter. And for your listeners that don't know that, I mean, that's go back and Google it and you'll see. I didn't sign up for that, but it became obvious that we had an errors and an omission side of things because of the trapping side. And, you know, trapping has always been the ugly redheaded stepchild on a milk carton when it comes to, you know, knowledge and being able to distribute information about that and the facts and the data, because people envision great big giant bear traps from the 1880s or the mountain men coming across for Western expansion and, you know, part of the Canadian side, the Hudson Bay culture, you know, raping and pillaging the landscape, which in today's modern day wildlife conservation and the North American model of wildlife conservation mentality, that's nothing could be further from the truth. And so there wasn't good representation on the trapping side. There was very minimal representation on the predator side. And we decided, my wife and I and my son, we own and operate a wildlife control business, and nobody was defending our efforts. And we also do pest control. And from that side, nobody essentially was defending our efforts. And so I got in and started challenging myself to become a little bit educated and worldly when it came to ballot box issues and became legislative issues and statutes and regulations and how things were formulated. And so much of it had been done over time just through the natural cycle of attrition. And there was nobody there to change anything. So some of the things became antiquated and some were outdated and some were overlooked. And I decided to jump on board to see what we could do to streamline, update, bring them into the 21st century, so to speak. And then came with that all these other things that somebody out there, and I don't think that they thought that I was bigger, better, meaner, faster, stronger, smarter than anybody else. I think that they figured, well, if this is the only dumb bastard standing at the front of the line, let's go ahead and take advantage of him. But with that, there comes a lot of targets. As Jann well knows, some of the things that have been brought upon myself and my family and even our community, but our business, our way of life and livelihood. And
I'm going to interrupt Dan for just 1 second. It's so insane that, and Dan kind of glossed over it, but in Colorado, I think, what was it, back in April, there had been such threats against Dan, his family, other people in the organization. We had to go through metal detectors to get to our Colorado Parks and Wildlife meeting. And then it was crazy lunchtime, they do there was an announcement. There has been I don't even remember what they said, Dan, but there's a problem on the premises. Everybody needs to evacuate. Yeah. And we're like, so it's insanity.
I was wearing a bulletproof vest.
Yeah, but it was.
You're exactly right, Jann. And they didn't mandate, but they highly suggested that I wore a bulletproof vest, and I was had a security detail and was using the service elevator for the freaking hotel. Wow. It's gotten to that point now. That's over time. It's built up to that. But at the same time, the particular community that we're up against, you can consider them enemies or adversaries or whatever. Sometimes I think they're just whack jobs, and you see what goes on in environmental science. You see what goes on in the conservation community, and there's people that think their best way to do things is to protest and do things that are very disruptive and distracting, and that also comes with things that are threatening as well. So anyway, we put lobbyists on the ground. We're the only organization in the state that has full-time lobbying representation at the Capitol, and we have since 2016. Until now, since we formulated in 2016, we are undefeated. We are 22-0. We've never been beaten at the legislature or at the commission, or now a couple times at the ballot. Now we've become close, and there's some things in front of the commission right now that we have to be very cognizant of, as Jann is fully aware of. We have a fur ban petition. We've got a prairie dog petition. We've got, I think there's 11 petitions going in front of the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Commission. And we defeated multiple pieces of legislation this year again. And we also forced the governor's pick on animal rights extremist commissioners to not be confirmed. So we're fighting at every level, but it's damn sure not me. It's just me instigating and me being the tip of the spear. But as I joke, we're coming up the 17th of June, and I joke that, everybody thought Custer was a great big guy until he went to the Little Bighorn, and they all talk highly about William Wallace, but he got his damn head cut off. And so there's trials and tribulations in the conservation community to do what's right. And I think that a lot of people find out that it's harder than just checking a box or trying to do something that they think is good for a banquet or a fundraiser or some organization. The fight is just as important as raising money for the conservation side, because me selfishly, if all we're going to do is conservation and we're not going to have an opportunity to turn around and engage in that conservation from a management perspective, a hunting perspective, a sporting perspective, I'm going to have a lot less interest in it, because my life has revolved around that since I was a kid. My business, my life, my livelihood. When I vacation, I go hunt, and when I'm doing my business work, I'm essentially hunting with the wildlife and pest control business. And so Canada has the same trials and tribulations of what the U.S., but not to the extreme. And I've been fortunate enough to be in Canada a couple times and did some podcasts on our platform. And I saw a lot of similarities, but the one thing that's not similar is the indigenous side. And as soon as you mention the indigenous side up there, the people down here don't screw with it. They don't bother with it, because it's like it's taboo. I don't know what they do up there about down here, but we've had a lot of Canadian support on our issues, and it's cool to see that interaction countrywide, because it's people's lives, it's people's livelihood, it's the resource, it's the ecology side, the ecosystem, the biodiversity side, all the cliche terms that are there that none of us ever used. But we are all in this together trying to figure out how to make it work. And I just happen to be the shiny object of the day, or the shiny fishing lure in the tackle box right now. So.
Well, Dan, I want to commend you and CRWM and Howell and so many others for that fight. And okay, fair enough, the shiny object. I totally disagree. I think that, it's the man that has the courage to be the face of this and to stand up. And there's shiny objects, and then there's somebody having the courage to do the work. And incredibly grateful. If we could just circle back, and you mentioned 2016 is when CRWM was firing up, and you were digging in. What was coming? What was on the horizon where you're like, okay, we need to get ready for this and start getting fired up for it? What was the sort of the litmus the segue that led to where we headed in that direction?
Well, you just started to see a changing demographics of outreach at different levels from the sporting community. And, Colorado has grown exponentially over the course of the last, 20 years. I mean, when you go back to 1992 and 1996, we had roughly 1.9 million people in the state, and we lost bear hunting. And then in 96, we lost trapping through ballot initiatives. One was an Initiative 10 in 1992, and then the Constitutional Amendment 14 on the trapping issue in 96. The bear issue passed, which is remarkable to me, but it passed the spring bear hunting ban and the spring bait, spring hounds, utilizing that all across the board. That passed by 69 to 31%. The trapping deal passed by 52 to 48. Now, that was a constitutional amendment. But we just saw a change that needed to be addressed, because sportsmen were not engaged enough, and we thought that there was something that needed to be done to have legitimate lobbying representation at the Capitol, because a lot of the stuff was coming up at the Capitol. Now, we were playing very deeply at the commission level. About 2016, after being appointed by Governor Hickenlooper in 2014, I started to see the internal workings at a much different level than what most sportsmen would, because you start to, I've been working with Colorado Parks and Wildlife, Division of Wildlife, most all my life. But to see it internally and to see the functionality or the dysfunction of it, or the government undermining this, or you could consider it manipulation before, but not compared to today. Compared to today, this is like, the Antichrist is running our government here in the state of Colorado. we knew that things were going to change because Hickenlooper was termed out. And this guy Polis, who was a federal congressman at the time, kept surfacing in the conversations. And we thought, to take on somebody that knew that has what we thought was similar ideologies of Governor Hickenlooper, but a little bit more left-leaning when it came to consumptive use or outdoor recreation. We thought we better do something. And doing that, it proved to be probably one of the smartest things that my buddy and I, Chris Journey, had ever done, because once Governor Polis got elected, it came out that his husband was a staunch left-wing animal rights extremist, not an activist, not an animal welfare activist. He believes that you shouldn't do anything for any reason or at any level. They went after agriculture. They went after the wildlife side, but we were already established and we were already internally vetted through the agencies, through the Department of Natural Resources and Colorado Parks and Wildlife. That turned out to be the smartest move that we probably would have made. And because we formulated as a 501c4, as opposed to just a charitable organization as a C3, we could do much more on the legitimate advocacy of policy and all the things. And that's one of the things that I want to mention, is the fact that if our legacy is nothing other than defeating 127 and everything that we did that nobody really recognizes. I hear Jan's dog.
Sorry.
That just shows you're a dog lover, Jann. That's all it is. So, but with all seriousness, looking at what all the conservation organizations in the country have done. Now they've formulated some C4s since we've done the 127 venture, but the majority of our coalitions, the majority of the conservation groups in the country, overwhelming majority, have been 501c3s. And to anybody that doesn't know, that means that you're limited on what you can do for political advocacy. You can't support campaigns. You can't support specific issues beyond your original mission statement. You can't get outside your wheelhouse. And if you do, then you could be subject to Internal Revenue Service penalties, and then maybe revocation of different privileges or tax status or something. So everybody on the conservation side, for the most part, has been very good at the conservation building side. But I'm critical, and I can do that now because we built up a legitimate level of institutional knowledge and partnerships and coalition building. Those organizations, in my mind, should have done exactly what we did and do what they did at the same time. But when they formulated 40 or 50 or 60 years ago, they weren't having to fight at the level that we've had to fight in the last 10 or 15 or 20 years. And when we got criticized back in 2016 for what we did tax status-wise, 501c4, that's not a tax-deductible contribution. And people don't really want to talk about wildlife and politics. Well, now they're having to talk about wildlife and politics. When we did that, even the big brother organizations that we're partners with said, why the hell are you doing a C4? And, we stayed the course because we wanted lobbying representation. And lo and behold, by the time we started doing these other advocacy projects and then having to do ballot initiatives, we looked like the smartest one in the room because not everybody else was prepared in any way, shape, or form. And that set the tone and narrative to where maybe they didn't agree with our attempts, but they understood at that point in time why we did what we did, because they were not prepared to be able to do it. And there again, then you write the road of progress in history, that now you start to see some of these other larger organizations that have tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of members, starting to formulate C4s in addition to their C3. And if the legacy is nothing other than that, then that's a success, because we can't fight for conservation without having the legs and the arms and the team to be able to do that. And to me, conservation is valuable, but the more you deal with conservation and you don't include sporting activities and wildlife management from a consumptive use standpoint, then what is conservation other than just turnaround and preservation? So,
well, I think one of the unique things that we have in Colorado is we do have a team. We have and so if you look at CRWM as the, really the hub, we have, we had a meeting, 2 weeks ago, and you had representation from a lot of conservation organizations. And it was and we were at one point brainstorming on how can we get more people involved. And it was, okay, who knows the cattlemen's, who knows the wool producers? We just wanted to cover all the different, we had RMEF, Wild Sheep Foundation. We had so many of the players in the room, but there's that spoke of CRWM that is kind of, and I think that's unique to Colorado. And that, in my mind, is why we were able to, do so well in 127. So it was Dan's, forethought, I guess, and seeing all the, the nastiness of government.
Yeah, and a lot of it too, Jan, and I appreciate that, but a lot of it too was bringing an awareness to individuals that had been recipients of bad government and legislation or animal rights extremism, and they didn't even know it. They didn't even know, and I think, I know Jan would agree that when we started the 127 campaign, we'd been fighting diligently to get people involved. But the overwhelming majority, and I would say close to 95% of the people that we interacted with for the first 8 months of the 127 campaign. And keep in mind, we were fighting Ordinance 308 at the same time, which was the fur ban in the city and county of Denver that would have banned cowboy hats and fishing lures and Native American crafts and everything. The overwhelming majority of all those people, they didn't know who their senator was. They didn't know who their representative was. They didn't know what Senate district they lived in. And when you kept telling them you have to go to the Capitol and you have to do this and you got to get registered to vote, and it was mind-boggling. It was like we were talking to a bunch of aliens for the most part, because they just didn't understand, why does wildlife have anything to do with this? And you had to explain it to them over and over and over. And the organizations did an okay job, but the organizations for the most part didn't have legitimate representation until about 2021, 2022, post-COVID. And that's when we formulated the Colorado Wildlife Conservation Project, which is a coalition of like-minded organizations that support the North American model. I think there's 26 of us in the group right now. CRWM is still the only legitimate C4. Now, RMEF just created the Hunt to Conserve C4. But that shows you the antiquation of a thought process of being proactive enough to see what's going to happen the next election cycle. Because,
well, I think one of the important things, all of that happened in 2021 after the wolf reintroduction in 2020. 2020. And the thing with that was, I think as sportsmen, we thought that didn't have a chance. I truly, truly believe that. And so then it was, a bunch of Coloradans going, what did we just do? Mm-hmm. We didn't activate. We didn't engage. Mm-hmm. We just kind of sat on our hands and thought, oh, this is never going to happen. So we're not going to worry about being registered or voting or any of those kinds of things. And so then we realized it was time to engage. And that's where, Dan just baptism by fire. He'd been doing it for years. But after the people really stood up and took notice when the wolves were reintroduced.
So, Dan, do you think, on your note about the 501c4, and I know, do you think it's important to have multiple 501c4s, or do we want the mile high, a mile wide, and an inch deep, or do we want somebody like CRWM in Colorado that is our 501c4 representing, science-based wildlife management and hunter interests, and we give you guys the resources? Or is it more effective to have sort of a multitude of, quote, lobbyists that are supporting the mission? Obviously, RMEF, they've got other interests like elk interests and other things too. But on the science-based wildlife management and the conservation and the hunter conservationist side, are we good with a CRWM exclusively?
Well, it's a good question. I think every state's probably different for sure. But at the same time, I think most of the conservation groups that are C3s have a few paid staff. Now, the great big ones have more than that. I mean, it's a business. It's not a good old boys hunting club like Isaac Walton maybe used to be. These are businesses, and these are conservation businesses that They generate a lot of money. They have to have paid staff. They have to have the functionality to be able to turn around and do what they do. When you do that from a C4 standpoint, it even becomes more convoluted because now you're engaged with the legislature and you're engaged in maybe writing legislation, and then you need lobbyists, and you need lobbyists that are going to act in the best level of representation for your mission. And so then that's dual purpose because you have to be very, very scoped. And we have a foundation as well. We are a C3, but the C3 is from an education standpoint because we don't do boots on the ground conservation. But the C4 can be, put on the gloves and go to fight side of things. But we need the C3 to be able to advocate on the education of the benefits of hunting and fishing or science-based wildlife management. To answer your question, Kyle, about what's best, I think a lot of it depends on the way the state has already been set up constitutionally and statutorily to see how much protection or how much obstruction that there actually is for organizations to be able to work through and get through that sausage making process, the minutia. And Colorado was very complacent with mediocrity back in the 80s and 90s. It's Colorado. Everybody wanted to go to Colorado. I mean, John Denver was here. You Rocky Mountain High and country roads and Cowboys and Pikes Peak and all the stuff that we all bragged and talked about. Well, then it came to where everybody wanted to move to Colorado. And then when you start getting politics involved in it, and you look at, there was a book that was printed, and it wasn't too long ago, but it was based upon the Democratic takeover of the state of Colorado and why every Republican should be worried about it. And it's called The Blueprint. And it's not centric to Colorado. It's a roadmap that's been built throughout the United States. And I would imagine if you compared it and you read it, it's probably pretty close to what the Canadian provinces have had to deal with to some degree. It's an ideology of liberal left-wing mentality that is trying to interject or infuse or indoctrinate and change the middle of the road. It's not trying to change the right wing. It's changing the middle of the road. And if you read a book like The Blueprint, our governor is mentioned in there. He was actually one of the original instigators. If you talk to our lobbyist right now, she was a former legislator. She's in the book because she saw what was going on and she actually changed parties. These are the type of things that the average sportsman and woman, they just want to turn around and go hunt. They want to apply for a license. They want to book a trip. They want to spend time in the field. They want to take their kids out. They want to hang something on the wall or turn around and feed their family. And it doesn't help when we're so blinded because our heads are in the sand that while we're doing what we do, in Colorado as an example, 120 days out of the year is the legislative session. But preparation for the next session, which just ended on May 14th, is already building in June of 26 for the January 13th start of the legislative session in 2027. It's not a 4-month session. That's why legislators get paid year-round. It's essentially a 14-month session because they're already planning on what they did last year that they didn't get accomplished this year. And then they could turn around and dissect it and water it down or ramp it up to get what they want 2 years. Very seldom does a bill get passed the first year. If it does, it's got unequivocal bipartisan support. But if it's contentious, it takes it typically 2, 3, 4, 5 years to be able to get passed. And if sportsmen are in the process of that for something that is being manipulated and undermined behind the scenes, and then you throw in a gubernatorial administration that is separate from the legislative side of things, and then that governor can appoint commissioners to think ideologically the same as the governor and his husband, that's a different set of government. And then you've got the ballot initiative. I think, honestly, that if we looked at 50 years from now, which I'll be dead and gone, I imagine you both will be dead and gone. Jann will never die. I mean, she'll live forever. But if we look back 50 years from now, we'll see the change. And I think this change is monumental enough to where you're going to start to see people wake up and smell the roses. And like you and I talked about prior to this episode, the IP28, the Initiative 302, all of these things are generational. They will change the makeup of conservation and wildlife management for the good or the bad, depending on what passes. And I think that you had to start somewhere. You had to turn around and start talking about why we need to change, why we need to make it better, just like our forefathers did, whether it was Teddy Roosevelt or the guys that did the Jingle Johnson, Pittman Robertson acts of the excise taxes in the United States. This is something that's generational. And most sportsmen don't think generationally. They think season to season. What tags did I draw? Where am I going? Where do I need to go to get something different? And why is an out-of-stater getting something that I didn't get myself?
Yeah. Well said. We've danced around it. Talk a little bit about why Colorado. So you talk about the book, you talk about the movement, you talk about your governor's husband. Talk about why, and we've seen some of this go on in Arizona, and who is behind it? Is it a movement? Are we exclusively the Humane Society of the USA? I'd like to understand a little bit more of how much of a movement there is, why Colorado, and what that looks like, and if it's the same people everywhere. Is it the same people in Colorado as in Arizona, as in Oregon right now? I'd like to understand that a little bit more, Dan.
No, it's a good point, and it's pretty much the same people. Sometimes it's the exact same people. They just change positions or change names or change organizations. For instance, the Humane Society of the United States, which is now Humane World for Animals. We've got the Center for Biological Diversity. We've got the People for Ethical Treatment of Animals, Project Coyote, the Mountain Lion Foundation, a plethora of different organizations. I mean, if you turn around and Google animal rights extremist organizations, there's everything from somebody who wants to protect termites from exterminators to somebody who wants to turn around and protect polar bears and everything in between. And protection is one thing. Conservation is a completely different thing in the sense to where conservation provides a use, a legitimate, sustainable, reputable, science-based use. The organizations that you mentioned have set up shop in the most likely states: Oregon, Washington, California, now Colorado. They're very active in New Mexico. Arizona is becoming, the epicenter of the Southwest for sure, primarily because the Center for Biological Diversity is based in Arizona. But other organizations have started to feel the need to prepare, the need to engage and create these coalitions. But you're exactly right. I mean, they work so well hand in hand together because if you look at their background and you go back to that C3, C4 status that I mentioned, they're all C3s that created maybe C4s, where we're also all C3s that maybe created C4s, or we started out as a C4 and created a C3. But their mission is to undermine wildlife management in North America wholeheartedly, straight across the board. They want the common term that people will have, and you'll hear it in British Columbia, and you'll hear it in Quebec, and you'll hear it in Nebraska and Texas, is rewilding. The rewilding of the landscape, not North America, not a state, the rewilding of the landscape. And that means essentially, and you hear the people talking, we've got testimony to prove it, take the people off the land, give it back to the wildlife, turn around and make sure it's the entire park system, the entire BLM and Forest Service becomes a preserve on a shelf for somebody to know that it's there and never be able to turn around and touch it. You can't use, my grandma always used to say, and I go back to the preserve conversation. When she was doing preserves, I remember this vividly. She would can stuff. And then at the end of the season, when we were all done, the whole basement wall would be filled with preserves, peaches and strawberries and jams and I remember chow chow and sauerkraut and all sorts of peppers and everything else. But she'd always save one on the shelf, and we could never touch that one. That would be the first one that got eaten the next year, but it was never the last one of anything because the last ones showed that you weren't preserving, you were conserving. And I thought, well, and that was when I was a kid. I remember that vividly. And then I started getting into conservation conversation. I'm like, well, hell, we do that with wildlife and we do that with landscape. Well, the rewilding side of things is you turn around and put it all on the shelf in the cellar and you don't touch any of it. You don't use it. You don't use the resource. You don't use the wildlife. You don't use the water. You don't use the land. You don't recreate. That's what they want. And I think when you start to talk to sensible, logical people that understand that they are under attack, just like I am from a conservation sporting perspective, that they start to pay attention a little bit more about elected officials, about pieces of legislation, The press starts to cover it a little bit more frequently. People start to understand the difference between a ballot and a bill and a petition. They understand the difference between a county commissioner and their legislator, or a federal congressman and a representative. They start to pay attention. Now, I'm not saying everybody's learned politics 101 right across the bat, but it's a hell of a lot better now than what it was 3 years ago. And it was better 3 years ago than what it was 10 years ago. And we have people that are making decisions on behalf of us, just like what you do in Canada, whether we put them there or not. If we didn't vote for them, they're still making those decisions. And if we did put them there as a whole majority, they're making appointments of other people that we didn't put there. And as Colorado is an example, the governor of the state of Colorado will probably have the opportunity to appoint or to hire between 3,000 and 3,800 individuals. And they're not like me and you if it's an animal rights a governor. Mm-hmm. And so you've infused all of that ideology to every single aspect of life, and the culture starts to change, and the rewilding deal starts to become more and more of a prominent deal. And actually, even our governor's wish list of wildly important goals, rewilding is part of that whole concept. The good thing about Colorado is a governor can only stay here for 2 terms. That's 8 years. And then we get somebody else, and we will this November. But when you have that ideology for 8 years, you start to brainwash a lot of people. And look at all the people that walk into the state, move into the state, or didn't pay attention to anything conservation or hunting wise. And the first thing they hear is about ban this and rewild that. Well, that must be good because the governor's talking about it. Those are the things we just need to pay attention to on the sporting side. And with partnerships like with Wild Sheep and Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, Safari Club International, we can do that because they're attacking every single one of us. They're attacking all of us. They're not just attacking one industry, one part of the industry. They're not just attacking one method to take. They're not just attacking one species or harvest. It's all of us that they want. Look at IP 28 in Oregon. All of it. Take it away. They don't want you to eat.
Yeah, I want to dive into 127, 128, or IP 28, and then what's going on now in Colorado with 302, Initiative 302. But before we do that, when the grizzly bear went away in British Columbia, somebody in a high-placed organization said, this is the best thing for hunting because it's such a, for the obvious reasons, it's controversial, and then they'll leave us alone. That was kind of the mentality. And we're just rolling our eyes just in disbelief. Dan, how important is it to defend all of it? You talked about banning trapping. Well, if trapping's so bloody controversial, we think we have it bad in the hunting community. My friends over at the Trappers, they're just like, holy crap, man, you have no idea. So I think we need to sort of, I'd love to hear your perspective on how it's important that we defend all of it, science-based wildlife management and the hunter conservationist interests, I guess, because there's people out there that are saying, let it go. Just let that stuff go. It's too controversial. And I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Well, I think based upon what we've had to deal with in Colorado as a prime example, you go back to 1992 on Initiative 10, where I mentioned they took away spring baiting and hounding and fall baiting and hounding, spring hunting, period. But they left it up to the fall. You could spot and stalk. If you saw a bear, you could turn around and kill it. If you're hunting deer and elk and you saw one, you had a license. But our bear population has expanded to the point now to where now they're making more laws, rules, and regulations about trash dumpsters and about feeding your hummingbirds and how that could attract bears and how many bears are being killed by government staff now. Even though we still have hunting seasons, we don't have hunting seasons to where you can manage the bear population. You look at the trapping issue. Look, I was a wildlife control operator back when they banned it in 96. I've been doing this over 40 years. My business increased exponentially. Now, I haven't been able to operate it like I'd want to with my son in the last 3 years because of the politics. But what we were doing for minimal wages at the time increased dramatically because the average person couldn't do it legally because they took it away. And then you started to see significant population increases, whether it's coyotes, foxes, a variety of fur-bearing species, nuisance-type species that interact with humans and get into the cities. But the laws, rules, and regulations that went along that provided an opportunity for organizations to be formed and businesses to be formed that then created a higher cost to the public, to the consumer, to the end user that had some sort of a wildlife conflict. You get into all the things that have happened up until then about attempts to try to degrade or erode this species or that method of take, or to create some sort of a study, not from the science-based side, not from the agency side. This has all been driven from political agendas of individuals that get in that are, well, they've got a chip on their shoulder about specific things. And I think that to answer your question, if you don't defend all of it and rely on the science side of it, everything else starts to get chipped away, and pretty soon you end up with, what do you have to defend that's left? And I said this statement in one of our stakeholder advisory group meetings that I wasn't forced to participate, but I guess I was privileged, but now it's been more of a hangman's noose because it was on the wolf introduction. I said, everybody's got a level of tolerance, and I was the only wildlife control operator that was sitting at the table. And a mouse to somebody in a restaurant is a wolf to somebody on the landscape that runs cattle or sheep. People that I deal with in my business love wildlife until it's in their attic or eating the wires out of their car or digging in their garden, or the bats are roosting on their back porch and they've got a bar mitzvah or a wedding or a graduation that's coming and they need to get rid of the bats because they're pooping everywhere and they're a hazard. And then when I tell them that they're state and federally protected and you can't touch them because they have the pups, they're like, well, what dumb bastard turned around and made that law and regulation? 3 weeks ago, you thought it was cool because they were eating all the insects until they had pups. Everybody has a level of tolerance. And when it comes into wildlife management, we need to convince the general public that it's not what I and you and Jann and everybody else says. It's not what the antis say. It's not the extremists. It's what the science-based wildlife managers say and why we should do what we should do. And if they determine that we shouldn't hunt grizzly bears for population growth and sustainable populations in perpetuity, I'm all for that. If they say that we shouldn't kill coyotes and the numbers that we have, and that we need to turn around and look at some sort of a study or something to make coyote populations better, I'm all for that. I'm talking about predators here. They should have the unequivocal authority to make those decisions, and it shouldn't be a political motivation about what is confrontational or what somebody doesn't like. Because I'll tell you what, there's people that don't like sandhill crane hunting. There's people that don't like ptarmigan hunting. There's people that don't like prairie dog hunting. There's people that don't like antelope hunting. There's people that don't like archery hunting. What is not going to be controversial or confrontational for one group? Because when you start taking this other stuff away, they can't go after that anymore. They have to go after something else. And I guarantee you turn around and take the grizzly bear out because somebody doesn't like it. Those people that were motivated to get that done will jump on another bandwagon about black bears or moose or stone sheep or whatever else, because they don't have to worry about protecting grizzly bears anymore. Look how effective we were. Our squeaky wheel got the grease and we got what we wanted. Let's move to the next level and let's turn around and do it. And I reference back because I know we're going to talk about it, just like IP28. Take a little bit, get a lot. You don't get a lot, you keep taking a little bit, and pretty soon you get it all.
Well, and that was pretty open discussion during 127 that, let's ban the hunting of bobcat, mountain lion, bobcat, and lynx. And then it does. I used to think this was a BS, it's a slippery slope. It's not a slippery slope. And I think you've seen that in BC. It's always what's next. Mm-hmm. And so I think the thought was we're going to, ban the hunting of mountain lion, bobcat, and lynx. And I mean, it was openly discussed that, sheep are next. And, so it's that you've got to, and we all have to work together. It doesn't matter if we're, bow hunters. I consider myself honestly a non-hunter. I don't hunt much anymore, but I'm passionate about it. But there's a lot of people, that are in that same, they support hunting, but maybe they don't hunt. And that's what it takes is, bow hunters, gun hunters, private land, public land, everybody. And that's where we see the difference between, and I hate to say us and them, but as the hunting community or the hunting supportive community and the anti-hunters is they work together quite well. And we've seen that at our CPW meetings where, the same people are passionate about wolves. And then they come to the next meeting and their parts of cats aren't trophies. It's they don't care what it is. They're there in support of it. And I think we see that quite often at the CITES convention a few years ago in Panama. You had, like people that wanted to protect sea cucumbers were right alongside with the people that wanted to protect bears in Louisiana. So they were all working together. And, we're like, oh, I'm an elk guy, or I'm a deer guy, or I'm a sheep guy. And so I think that's one of the differences. And I think you'd both agree with that, and obviously Kyle and I are sheep guys, but we all need to, be one team.
Well, and, going back to your rewilding, rewilding is rewilding. It's not, everything except for deer or everything except for ungulates or whatever that is. So, I think that all says it there. I want to keep moving on here. There's so much great stuff, and I promised I'd let Dan go within 4 or 5 hours. So,
let me before you jump to the next deal, let me interrupt you real quick, just to where people don't understand, because most people won't go back and look it up. But the definition of rewilding is a progressive approach to ecological conservation that aims to restore natural processes, wilderness, and native biodiversity. Unlike traditional conservation, which heavily manages specific habitats or species, rewilding focuses on creating self-sustaining dynamic ecosystems with minimal or no human intervention. That means they don't want us there. Well, I don't know what you guys feel like, but if somebody's going to turn around and come beating on my door that they're going to rewild my house, well, they're not going to make it very far. And I think right now they're rewilding our house when it comes to our natural resources and conservation efforts. So not to belabor the conversation, I just wanted to get it out, because those are the sound bites that people need to understand, that this is what it is and this is what they want. And anybody that disagrees with our way of life thinks just like this.
It's basically preservation versus conservation, effectively. And
yep.
I've heard, I won't mention the org name, but they've said, let caribou go, let them go. They're stupid. They don't adapt. And so that's a line. Tell me if I'm correct. That's rewilding. It's letting nature take its course. So if the wolves are predominant, and then, and of course they're going to make the argument, well, it's the cycle of life and disease and, overabundance, and then, it self-corrects. But that's what they're talking about. They're not talking, and that maybe means loss of caribou or other species on the landscape. It's just letting nature decide where to go.
Well, Kyle, there was a time centuries ago and several hundred years ago in different countries and different continents that you didn't have the laws, rules, and regulations and respect for human life as much as what you do now. The rewilding side of things was good for humans at one point in time too. And I'm not saying that we need a mass exodus or genocide by any means, but to utilize that mentality is irresponsible. And I think it's one-sided to try to say, you shouldn't do this because I don't want you to, but I want you to do this because I want you to. And I think that those are the things where, modern day science and the technological advancements that we've been able to build and to bring into this conversation have been monumental. And it's been for species. Our wildlife populations, for the most part, throughout the entire planet have increased, even at the same time that we've increased human populations to 8 billion people. And I'm not saying they're perfect everywhere, but the human populations aren't perfect everywhere either. But when you look at what has been created, and if you look at the Shane Mahoney side of things, you look at Conservation Visions and the Wild Harvest Initiative, and you put those numbers to the actual work on the ground, that's what we should be looking at, because the human population is going to continue to grow. And so conservation is reliant on the human population, but preservation is reliant on good, solid conservation. And without that, I think that we're beating a dead horse and we're barking up the wrong tree.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well said. Yeah, lots of great stuff there, and we could have a podcast on rewilding exclusively. But I kind of want to touch a little bit about the past. We've talked about 127. We've talked a little bit about wolves. We've talked a little bit of ballot-box biology. I maybe won't do the deep dive into that. I kind of really want to make sure we talk about what's happening today, specifically maybe in Colorado, but a little bit about IP28 in Oregon. And then also, what you guys are like, what do we need to do? So that's really, there's been a ton of podcasts, Dan, talking about Prop 127, and there's a lot of information out there. So I'm going to let our guests sort of do the deep dive on that. Maybe let's talk about where we're at today. What are some of the things on the horizon? What are we concerned about? Obviously, IP28's come up. Lots of dialogue there. So maybe let's kick off with that. But any other stuff that you're sort of looking at in Colorado right now or across the states that's of real particular concern?
Well, I think the one of the reasons why it's important to consider what we're working on here with the constitutional right to hunt and fish on Initiative 302. While we're gathering signatures for that, it'll make it a constitutional amendment to create the right to hunt and fish. One of the reasons that we think that we need this to make Colorado the 25th state for this to happen is just because of IP28 and things like that and what we've had to deal with here in Colorado. IP28 is the Peace Act, and it's the People for Elimination of Animal Cruelty Exemptions. And there's if you read it, there's no pest control, there's no domestic livestock production, there's no chickens, and there's no pork, and there's no sheep, and there's no goat, and there's no cattle, there's no milk, there's no hunting, there's no fishing, there's no trapping, there's no nothing. And they talk about everything being, this trying to eliminate the animal cruelty side. Well,
Dan, what is pest control? Like, what do they mean by that? So, like, where's the limit? You won't be able to kill a rat. You won't be able to kill a rat or a mouse, or you won't be able to do anything with an insect. So you can't kill a bug in your house, like with a fly swatter? Not
legally. I mean, we just got done doing Senate Bill 62, which we defeated handily after 8 weeks in the Senate. But it would have banned and prohibited the ability to kill rats and mice in the state of Colorado. I mean, there's people out there that think that the Black Plague syndrome, and I'm a pest control operator, that, they think that we should live with rats and mice. The bad thing is the Senate actually passed it, and then it went to the House, and the House was smart enough in House Ag to turn around and deny it and fail it. But these are the mentalities of certain people, just like I mentioned, the mouse to somebody is a wolf to somebody else. Well, to the animal rights extremists, the hard left-wing animal rights extremists, they believe that we should live like them, and everything is a sentient being, whether it's a pinyon nut, or a pinyon tree, or a cow, or a grizzly bear. To them, it does not matter because it's a living, breathing thing, and we should all live in harmony and have this coexistence to be able to do this together. And when you start doing the research on stuff, Kyle, the average sportsman doesn't realize how serious, volatile, and fragile the situation is. And we're to a point to where you need to call a spade a spade. You need to turn around and put the facts out there, because the lies and fallacies and falsehoods of our enemies are talking about all of these things, just like this sweeping language to turn around and invoke IP28, which is an attempt to move that mission into Washington and into California and into other states. It's not just centric to Oregon. They know that if they can get it in Oregon, they can probably turn around and take full advantage of it and gain traction, if not additional funding, gain traction in other states as well.
So, Dan, how does you talk about your bill that passed in the Senate in Colorado there? How do you get lawmakers who are, in theory, they should be very, responsible, adept, accomplished human beings? How does something like that pass where you cannot kill a rat or mice in your house? How does it get past that? Like, is it bundled as this like the big beautiful bill where it's like there's all these great things?
No, it's very, very segregated. It was an individual deal. It was Senate Bill 62, and the lobbyist on that side and the constituents on that side, which was Project Coyote and a bunch of the other animal rights organizations, came to different legislators. And I think that, you got to consider legislators want votes, and votes turn into elections. And when you turn around and say, this is what the people of the state of Colorado want, this is what your constituents want, you need to pass this. This is damaging to the environment. It's not helpful to other species. It's this convoluted idea that they feed the legislators, and then they sometimes bite and sometimes they don't. The bad part about it is is if you look at IP 28 as an example, just as a comparison, I think it started out as IP 3, and then it went to IP 13. At the first time, they had like 4,000 or 5,000 signatures to get it on the ballot, and then they got to like 18 or 20,000 signatures. Now they're over the threshold. They're pushing 130, 140,000 signatures. They have enough, if they all qualify, to get it on the ballot. You start to gain that momentum. Goes back to what I said originally. Very few bills get passed the first year. Out of the 700 and some odd bills that were introduced in the Colorado General Assembly last year, there was about 118 that actually passed. A lot of them didn't even get through the first committee. And some of those 118 were actually worked on for probably 2 or 3 years prior. And then other ones prior to that got passed that were worked on for 2 or 3 or 4 years prior to that. This IP 28 deal, this is 3 election cycles that they've tried to maneuver through to get this to where they wanted it. And some other people start to jump on board and they start to think, well, maybe that's not such a bad idea. There's more people, or you get more people that move in the state, or they gain more momentum on their fundraising or whatever. And it starts to become part, my mom used to say this all the time. If you say a lie enough, Daniel, you'll start to believe it. And I think that some of the words that I'm bringing up about my grandmother and my family, looking at things the way that they turn out, that's the way society is. You say it enough, people will start to believe it, whether it's true or false. And given the facts and the data, statistics, and the things that we have, the studies and the information and the science to go along with it, that's what we should be boasting about. But we keep talking about all the stuff and all the lies of everybody else, and they keep listening to all the lies of everybody else. So,
So back to IP 28. So when we look at this, there's a bunch of nonsense in there. And I think I heard you on a previous podcast talk about it, saying, you don't expect it to pass, but this is a testing ground. So just touch a little bit about, what's the end game here? You talk about, there was IP3 and then, they kept ramping it up. So like, what's the end game? What does this look like? And what's the outcome? Like, what does it look like if this fails? Or obviously we know where we go if it passes, but what does that look like?
Well, I mean, the core proposal of I-228 is to remove the legal exemptions and exceptions to the rule. And IP-28 reclassifies the intentional injury or killing of animals as criminal animal abuse. Exceptions would only be permitted for immediate self-defense and veterinary care. They don't want you to do anything with it, period. And I think you start looking at billion dollar industries of domestic livestock production, or honeybees, or the veterinary care side of things, or the hunting and fishing, and all the stuff that goes into this. This is a multiple billion dollar. I don't know the specifics, but it's multiple billion dollars. It's not $3 billion of revenue generated that would be gone. It's all of the stuff that would incorporate into this animal sanctuary state to stop every single thing that had to do with animals, whether domestic or wildlife. And that's concerning enough to where the average person would have to figure out a way to eat and to live and to sustain themselves, whether it's for domestic production or not. Stop and think, if they banned all that in the state of Oregon, just domestic livestock production, eggs and pork and cattle and chicken. That's salmon too. You couldn't fish. You had to ship it in from Washington or California or Alaska or wherever the hell. What would that do for the cost? How would restaurants be able to do it? What about farmers markets? What about stores? All of the stuff that you turn around and look at for just feeding the state of the state of Oregon, and that Washington, can Washington supply all that? No. Could Idaho supply all that? No. Is Canada going to supply all that? No. Not everything comes from each state, but there's a lot of stuff that comes from the states, and you wouldn't be able to do any of it.
So then what is the motivation of IP28? Is it actually to do what they say they're doing? Because they have to know, like you as a, your 501c4, you as a lobbyist knows that if you want to enact something, you have to build consensus. You need to get something that's going to, appeal to the masses. And they know that that's not the case. There's going to be, these massive lobby groups like, cattlemen's and, the dairy producing sector and all that sort of stuff that are going to come out hard against us. So what's the end game here? What's the antis thinking in IP28?
Well, I wouldn't speak on behalf of the individual who's supporting this, and if you look at him, he doesn't look like he's very healthy anyway. But so I don't think he's been eating the product that we've been eating. All of us look pretty healthy on this thing. But this is to stop what they believe should be part of everyday life and society in the state of Oregon, and I really believe build some support as far as a fundraising mechanism. I mean, while supporters in the state, understand that the goal is to shift public consciousness regarding animal rights and commodification, I think the measure faces strong opposition from a coalition of farmers, hunters, conservationists, indigenous communities who warn that it would threaten the local food security and decimate state wildlife funding. The people that are formulating these plans, they don't care about any of that. And I think that they're willing to shoot for the sky and hopefully maybe bring some attention to their particular cause and their proposals, and then settle for something that they can go back to a game commission or the legislature or to their county commission and start to invoke specific things in specific townships or counties or whatever, and say, look, the people didn't vote for this, but look how much support we got, and look how many people came from these districts. Look how many people came from your particular Senate district or your legislative district. I think it's a long game. They've been playing the long game. I mean, who the hell would turn around and try to get something passed after 3 election cycles, knowing full well that the general public as a whole doesn't want you screwing with their food, doesn't want you screwing with the economy, doesn't want you screwing with wildlife resources and domestic livestock production. They keep coming back, and I think their ultimate goal is to change the way people live, change society, rewild it in whatever capacity they think is necessary or is feasible, and fundraise at the same time so they can build up their resources to figure out one way, shape, or form to get a little bit of this and a little bit of that. Once they start getting a little bit, we just talked about the lot. You shot for the moon, unsuccessful. You go back, you settle for a little, and it's easier to start building that up. And maybe that's a 5 or 10 or 15 year program that they want to turn around and capitalize on.
It amazes me that they can get 120,000 signatures. Like how do they? How
have you been to the Portland airport?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, I have. Okay, fair enough.
I mean, so. And if I'm offending anybody in the Portland airport, I'm sorry, but I went through there at a leadership summit in March, and I was like, "What the hell?" This is like walking through. It was like walking through the bar in Star Wars, and I was like, it just didn't have the music behind it.
Oh, that's too funny. Okay, so IP28. So let's look a little bit about going on the offensive now. We've got Initiative 302. Let's dive into that and sort of, what's our call to action? What do hunters need to do? What's coming down the pipe, and how do we get more aligned so that we can sort of deal with this nonsense?
Well, I'll just briefly go over it. I mean, we got hit up to be the boots on the ground team to task with leading the ground charge on this Initiative 302, which would provide a constitutional right to hunt and fish in the state of Colorado. The International Order of T. Roosevelt reached out to me and said, hey, we keep talking to a bunch of people. You seem to be the shiny fishing lure in the box, and we've done some research and some background checks, and what you've been able to accomplish is something that we feel that we need to be able to try to utilize, especially on a short term. I think they probably, they did the research and maybe they got the bottom of the barrel, but at the same time, there's only one fish in the barrel. And so if there's anybody more well prepared to do this in the state of Colorado that's got the resources and the institutional knowledge and the teamwork that we've been able to build up with all these other organizations and entities in the partnership, I haven't seen it. And I'm more than welcome to share the wealth of the scrutiny and the disruption and the antagonism that's given to us. But we built a team up that was very formidable back in 2024 on 127. We led the charge, but we were not the only ones that did this. We did it with a lot of other partners, and we've been able to incorporate that relationship into an ongoing movement from 24 through now, because people started to open their eyes, and some of it, and Jann could Jann could chime in, but I mean, I very seldom take no for an answer. And if you tell me you can't do something, either you're dead to me or I turn around and convince you otherwise. And with Jann, you don't have to do that. She just shows up, and she shows up with bells and whistles and says, what do I need to do? And there's a lot of other people who are like, oh, well, I'm going fishing that day, or my kid's got a ballet reception that day or something. And
well, and I think the other thing that we've done is we've created kind of an interesting network where it's not just hunters and fishermen. We have farmers and ranchers, and Dan laughed at me the first time when I said, well, I'm going to take this to my Bible study ladies, and he's like, okay, yeah, well, guess what, I got 120 ladies to put no on 127 signs in their yard.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's that network, and I think that's been the pretty cool thing about Colorado is we do have an interesting network. And I think that's the thing about 302 right now is we're really trying to even expand on what we did in 127, to expand the people. We talk a lot about the heritage. This is our heritage. That's our, that's the biggest thing we want to make sure people understand is that we want to maintain what our grandfathers did, the hunting, the fishing. And I think that's the important message. And that goes, beyond, a deer hunter or a trapper, or, somebody that, worries about how many points they have in the draw system. It's more about the heritage of this and feeding our families. And that's where you get these, unique organizations. Dan actually has a funny story that we don't have time for about meeting a couple of gals in a bar in Denver, and, by the time it was done, he had allies in the game. And it's, just putting yourself out there, being loud and being proud of who we are as hunters and fishermen and supporters of hunting and fishing. Everybody that goes to Shields or Sportsman's Warehouse or Cabela's, Bass Pro Shop, they're not all hunters and fishermen, but they're supporters of it, or they're wannabes. Look at the sheep show. How many people do we have that say they're sheep hunters and have never harvested a sheep? So I think that's the unique thing we have in Colorado. And Dan has been really great about, building this coalition of people that are, we're all just people.
Well said, Jann. And I do want to talk about coalitions too, and sort of these unlikely allies, and obviously IP28 showing us that, we all need to think collectively, because there's going to be a hell of a lot more people than just hunters and anglers affected by an IP28 type scenario. But back to Initiative 302, Dan, if you could talk a little bit about what that looks like, what the plan is, how that's going to help science-based wildlife management, and then what we need to do. And is there anything that people at a state can do to support an initiative like this to make sure it goes forward?
No, thanks, Kyle. And I think Jann said it pretty well about the coalition side. The other thing, too, is being able to distribute and synthesize information that can be distributed to the general public, whether they're sporting type individuals or not. Whether, we're talking about 85% of the entire voting population is non-hunters. We got some anti-hunters on one side, you got some pro-hunters on the other side. And not everybody's going to think the same, whether they pro-hunt or they're antis. I mean, some on the anti side that disagree with, killing the mountain lions and bobcats might think that this is a way to be able to turn around and do this. And some of the hunting side might think that this might not be the way to do this. But I want to read the ballot language itself, because people need to understand the context of why we need to have this and why it needs to go to other states. And it says there is established a right of the people of the state of Colorado to hunt, fish, and harvest fish and wildlife, including by the use of traditional methods, and shall apply to all species of fish and wildlife managed by the state. Hunting and fishing shall be the primary and preferred means of responsibly managing and controlling fish and wildlife populations. This section is not to be construed to authorize trespass upon private property or to modify any provision of statutes relating to trespass or private property rights. Now, the original language said this section shall not limit the authority of the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Commission or the General Assembly to regulate hunting, fishing, and wildlife management. However, any such regulation must be reasonable and necessary for sound scientific wildlife conservation and management, public safety, or to preserve the future of hunting and fishing opportunities for all species statewide. The final title actually came out, and it has the provisions in there that talks about you can't hunt threatened and endangered species. You can't hunt federally protected species. You have to still have a license. There are still seasons that are structured, that are managed and regulated by Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and ultimately the commission. And it goes on the science side of it. There might be traditional methods. There might be preferred methods. All of this backs up the current statute in Colorado revised statutes of 33-1-101, which allows for a lot of this, but statutes can be changed. Constitutional amendments are much more difficult to turn around and do that. And that's why Amendment 14 back in 1996 was so important, because you're not going to go back and change it. What changed on trapping with the use of foothold traps, body gripping devices, and cable restraint devices in 96 passed by a margin of 52 to 48%. The raise the bar standard that was enacted in 2016, I think it was Amendment 71, changed the statutory and the constitutionality side of these ballot initiatives to where if you want to run a constitutional one, you need 55% of the entire voting public to be able to turn around and change that. Remember, I said 52 to 48 on Amendment 14. In today's standards, that would have not have passed. But to turn around and try to reverse that, to get that back to a 55% now, with getting 2% of all the signatures that you needed to get it on the ballot through each one of the 35 Senate districts, in a more liberally minded blue state like Colorado, that's not going to happen. And so it even codifies the statutory side of this more. If we're allowed to get this passed, and this passes by at least 55, if not more than 55%, and it passed by 67% in Florida. If we pass it at 55, it sets the tone and narrative for further conversations to the legislature, to gubernatorial administrations, to commission decisions, because the constitutionality said we adhere to this. You want to change that, you better have the science to back you up, and the agency better sign off on that. Otherwise, you're going to have to turn around and go to court and litigate through the constitutionality of what we've imposed that you want to turn around and try to change through statute or some sort of other court case or through some sort of petition that goes through the Parks and Wildlife Commission.
Wow. There's a lot to unpack there. I got like 17 questions from that.
I'm sorry.
One thing I want to understand a little bit is, so this is a ballot initiative. When you get a ballot, how many ballot initiatives? We don't do this in Canada, obviously. We just have a premier that gets elected, or quote, our governor, effectively, our equivalent of a governor, that will just come in and just make, random decisions based on their platform or otherwise, like shutting down grizzly bear hunting. That was a stroke of a pen. But these ballot initiatives, how many are on the ballot? Like, how many will you see when you go to do your vote? How many will be there?
Well, they're still gathering signatures on multiple ballot initiatives now. And there might be things about opioid addiction. There might be things about guns. There might be things about abortion. There might be things about taxes. There might be things about roads and bridges. There might be things about wildlife. Right now, I think there's a really good chance that if the other ones make the threshold on the necessary signatures and they get certified by the Secretary of State, I think that you're probably going to see somewhere between 6 and 12 individual ballot initiatives, not all constitutional. Some will be statutory that all you need is 50 plus 0.1%. The constitutional ones are the 55s. Okay. And so you're going to see, I think 26 states have this ballot box process available to them in some iteration, maybe not exactly. Oregon, you see the same thing with IP28. Now they've had 2 years to turn around and try to get the 117,000 signatures, and they're approaching 130 or something, because they all have to be certified. You have to make sure that you've got legitimate registered voters, and that all the information is on the voter registration, like what you signed, to make sure that Tom Herringbone turns around and comes up, he doesn't sign 15 different petitions, and they count him 15 different times. There's a process to be able to go through. But once you get on the ballot, then it's game on, and you are fighting just like a campaign or just like anything else to turn around and invoke what you want. Now, the thing I would say is, if I don't want Kyle Stelter, sorry. If I don't want Kyle Stelter to walk his pit bull and drink Coors Light after dark, I can turn around and legitimately, this is a facetious statement, but I can go that route and turn around and do the process, go through the title board, go through the legislative council, get my packets if I'm successful, and go out and get 124,873 signatures to make sure you can never do that again. And if people decide to vote that way, then I'm sorry, Kyle, but you won't be able to do that again. That's the lunacy.
And Kyle, our ballots are extremely complex. So I live in Will County. I'm not sure which county Dan lives in, but you may have on your ballot, you'll have the state initiatives. You may have some county things. Then you also may have, your local judges, state judges. They're very, very complex.
Yes. Yeah. And you might even have, as an example, Jan, we'll have state issues, we'll have county issues, and because I live out of county, I won't have the city issues. But if I lived in the city, then the city issues would be on there as well. And you start to look. I mean, it's not uncommon to see a very contentious year, especially when you have so many candidates running for different office. And the governor's candidacy it's not uncommon to turn around and see a ballot that might be 2 or 3 pages, but the ballot book that explains all of the stuff about the judges and about the ballot initiatives and the local ordinances and stuff. Stop and think, this is a very complicated process, but the ballot book might be 30, 40, 50, 60 pages. Well, the majority of voters aren't going to read that, and the ones that do aren't interested in all of it. And sometimes the ones that are interested in some of it still don't read it. And so stop and think about what we did in 2024, where the overwhelming majority of the population of the state of Colorado lives within 25 miles east or west of the I-25 corridor from Colorado Springs all the way to Wellington at the Wyoming line. Denver, Boulder, Fort Collins, where Jann lives. Jann lives in a beautiful spot, but it's got too damn many people for me. But you look at that, and you see that the majority of the people are voting on all things throughout the state, just like what they did in Wolves in 2020. And it's not going to affect them in any way, shape, or form. They just check the box. Yeah, I'd like to hear a wolf. Yeah, I'd like to know a wolf. They're not going to have any interaction with a wolf. They're not going to turn around and see people's jumping mice. They're not going to see fur bearers. They're not going to interact with any of this in any way, shape, or form. So the bulk of our voting population of 6 million people, roughly 4.5 million registered voters, they're making decisions on the entire state. And if you're talking about roads and bridges, you talk about taxes, we all should vote on that. You're talking about turning around and taking wolves and endangered or threatened species and putting them somewhere to where I'm never going to have to deal with them. That's a travesty, and that's where we question ballot box biology, because the science didn't support that. And just like on the mountain lion deal, I think the registered voters on the Front Range learned from what could be a mistake or a mishap on Prop 114, which was the wolf introduction, that they voted for that thinking wolves would be cool. Then they saw 4 years of trials and tribulations and bad publicity and press, and the ranchers and the lawsuits and the compensation programs, and it was in the news damn near every single day. And when Prop 127 came around, they said, wait a minute, well, that wolf deal was a mistake. Maybe we shouldn't turn around and be invoking my hairdresser, UPS driver opinion in on this wildlife management. And that's why we won by such a wide margin. We won by 10 points. And on the fur ban in the city and county of Denver, we won by 14 points. Those are monumental deals when you turn around and look at the majority of this stuff was 51 to 49 or 53 to 47. You start getting 45 and 55, and those are big numbers on a controversial subject like mountain lion hunting, for crying out loud.
Mm-hmm. So 302, is that going to fix these issues? Are we going to avoid a 127? Are we going to avoid a wolf reintroduction? is that going to solve all our problems, or is it just one more tool in the tool case?
It's a big tool in the toolbox. And some of the podcasts I've been on, my analogies are sometimes antiquated, and sometimes people can understand them, and then they look at me like, "What the hell is he talking about?" but I really believe. Yes, Jann does that all the time. She's like, "I don't know where he's talking. What? Just shut him up. Just shut him up." I'm surprised she had me get on this podcast because she knows how I talk. But the 302 deal is like a windshield. It stops everything from hitting you in the face, but if you have your windows down, it doesn't mean that a butterfly or a bee or a rock isn't going to come into the cab of the pickup. And I think that the windshield could be broken at times, and maybe it's going to get cracked and pitted. But I think it's a good analogy because when you have a constitutional amendment, it's going to be more difficult for legislators and individual people to change something unless this doesn't stop at 100%. This gives the unequivocal authority and codifies it in statute and the Constitution to give the managing agency and the governing agency with Colorado Parks and Wildlife the unequivocal authority to make the decisions that are science-based. Right now, we're going on social science. Right now, we're going on public opinion, emotional stuff, the rewilding conversation, things that don't have anything to do with anything that has to do with the perpetuation or the sustainability and conservation of our wildlife resources. And I think that this will put up a barrier and deter the majority of those attempts because of the constitutionality of it. And anybody that we've been talking to, I'm the first one to admit, Kyle, that if there's a need to stop something because you're going to be detrimental to a population of wildlife or to a habitat or to a resource, I would be the first dumb bastard to stand in front of the line against the sportsman community and say, look, we've said this all along. We need to turn around and make sure that we support the issues that we've been trying to fight. Now the wildlife resources need our help. Now the bighorn sheep need our help. Now the grizzly bears need our help. Now the Prebles jumping mice need our help. We have the federal side of that already in place. But we've got 78 game species in the state of Colorado, and there's not been one occasion where regulated hunting of those species has created a detrimental effect or created some sort of extirpation on those species in any way, shape, or form. I'm not talking about going back to the 1880s and the 1900s, early 1900s, before all of the Boone and Crockett conversations and the Theodore Roosevelts and the actiments of conservation groups. I'm talking about unregulated versus regulated. I'm talking about unscience versus science. There's not been one time since we started managing wildlife scientifically for the betterment of the resource as a whole, not one species, the resource as a whole, that we've actually created any demise or any extirpation of wildlife. But I'd be the first one to stand in line and say we need to do that, and we need to support our agency.
In Colorado, we have an amazing Colorado Parks and Wildlife, the staff, some of the testimony they've given, whether it be on, prairie chickens or, mountain lion, sheep, goats. We have a great staff, but they are often, probably more times than not, hamstrung. And we need to allow them to do their job and do, they absolutely support the, North American model. But we need to just allow them to. And I think that's what this this allows, is it will support them in a way that they need to be supported.
When we, with 302, where are we at with that? So how many signatures do you need? Do you know how many, where we're at? And what do people need to do to support this and make sure that 302 gets on the ballot and gets pushed forward?
Well, it's a good question, and there's two parts to this. The reason we were successful on 127 on a mountain lion deal that didn't affect everybody, it affected a small segment of the population, but a lot of people felt pressured to be able to participate. But not everybody was a lion hunter. Not everybody was a bobcat trapper. This affects everybody, whether they hunt or fish or trap or want to hunt or fish and trap, or whether they just agree with hunting and fishing and conservation and wildlife management. You have to be a resident of the state of Colorado and a registered voter to be able to sign the petition to get it on the ballot. We need 124,378 signatures. We're shooting for 200,000 because of that certification process that I mentioned, that that some are going to be invalid. Somebody got married and didn't change their name, or they didn't change their voter registration, or they didn't change their address, or maybe they go by an uncommon name, or whatever it might be. Typically, you figure there's about a 14% refusal rating on certifications. So with that theory, you need 180,000. Take 14% of that off, you're probably going to get down to the 140s or 150s or something. You need 200,000. You're probably going to be 28,000 short of certification of the totality, but you'll still be 40,000 above what is necessary to make the ballot. That comes from 2% of all the signatures gathered in the state from each one of the 35 Senate districts for, I think, the last Secretary of State election for registered voters. That's a complicated mathematical process. We're in that process now. We know that we've gained almost 100,000 signatures in about 5 weeks, which is a monumental effort. If you talk to the petitioners that are in the field right now, they're like, some of these are paid contractors, some of them are volunteers, but the paid people are like, this is the fastest we've ever seen this much interest and enthusiasm on a ballot initiative, especially a constitutional ballot initiative. So we're going to get it on the ballot. It'll be on. We have until August 3rd, and then there's a certification process that the Secretary of State has to certify to make sure you have those signatures accounted for in each one of those districts, and they're all legitimate. From, let's say, roughly September 3rd, we'll give them a month. Secretary of State sometimes, well, they're going to have a lot of work to do because of the other ballot initiatives as well. They have to certify all those. But from September 3rd to roughly Election Day, November 3rd, you're going to see a full-out onslaught campaign that is promoting the constitutional right to hunt and fish ballot initiative to make Colorado the 25th state in the nation to do this. And it's worth mentioning through that process that, this started in 1777 in Vermont. That's when they did it. And there's been 23 other states up until now. Colorado would be the 25th. People need to understand that this is something that if we don't do now, we could regret not doing it down the road because of the attacks and the assaults that have been given to the state of Colorado over the course of the last 30 years. And it's only going to continue to get worse. And whether you agree with hunting or fishing or not, you need to understand the benefits of what hunting provide to make sure that you help this mission and this message get across the finish line. Out-of-staters or non-residents of this country, the only thing they can pretty much do is contribute. And they can also help spread the word on social media. So when you see stuff come out about 302 that's positive, that we're kicking out now as a coalition and as a community, and it talks about the facts and the fallacies or the lies and the truths. And it talks about why you need what we have. And then you start to see social posts, or maybe you see op-eds and articles that come out. You'll start to see some campaign stuff early September, October, November. People can turn around and share that. And what we griped about so much during the 127 campaign, Kyle, was we had a monumental movement on a social media deal that because we were never social media oriented. And who the hell thought I'd be doing a podcast and have all the crap that we've got at our disposal now? And which is sickening to me because I didn't ever expect, and I was going to build a barn. I didn't intend on building a barn with a podcast room and then having 20 different platforms and trying to do podcasts once a week for the rest of my life. But you build that message up and you get it to the point to where people can resonate. Just like yesterday, as an example, the reason that Barbara Kirkmeyer, who's running for governor, and Victor Marks, who's running for governor, wanted to get on the Through the Gates podcast is because our platform has grown so much and we're talking about facts and data and science, and they reach out to us to see if we would be interested in having them both on.
Awesome.
That in itself is a big step for somebody that we've been doing this for a year and a half on the podcast on ourselves, and then we did it for a year during the 127 campaign. People need to watch, subscribe, share the information, share the clips. I would venture to say that anybody in Canada, whether in Alberta or in British Columbia or in Quebec or the Northwest Territories, they know somebody in Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe some of
them
them.
That was kind of the crazy thing during 127 is One Campfire did a lot of, supported it. And, I had friends in Colorado that say, oh, I hadn't seen this until I saw it on your favorite One Campfire post. And I was like, really? You didn't see, and they were like, nope, but saw it on One Campfire. And so how crazy is that a British Columbia started program is how a Colorado person saw about 127. Yep. So that just was a testament to me that, it doesn't matter what it is. And honestly, what state it is, because you don't know, we need to support each other, whether it's, British Columbia, Colorado, Wyoming, it doesn't matter. The more we put it out there, the better it is. And you just never know who it's going to reach.
Well, and to that point, real quick, Jan, you're exactly right. In looking at what we were able to do on incorporating women into the conversation, the women of conservation side of things, into this conversation, to where non-hunting women then paid attention to a bunch of these other women on social media that were hunters. These non-hunters, they just thought they'd lived a clean lifestyle and they wanted good stuff for their kids and for clean water and clean activities and just to be able to turn around and raise their kids in a way that was consistent with their beliefs. People need this when you see this stuff, and we don't do it enough. It's easy to check the little heart or the little thumbs up or give a little laugh signal or whatever, but to share it to your friends, you can expand that movement out so quickly, and you're going to expand it to your friends. But how many non-hunters do you know, Kyle? I know a bunch. We talk all the time. I know some anti-hunters that I'll try to rub their nose in the corner and turn around and try to get them to, but if they share it, hey, it's out there. And once we share and we build up that analytical algorithm to the point, and I'm not a technological guru. Sounds like it, talking like it, but I just learned fancy words from everybody else. Us turning around and doing a thumbs up, get it in the camera, is fine. But if you share it to 10 of your friends or share it to your feed on, all of a sudden, that's how stuff becomes viral. And if you're doing something that's right for the benefit of everybody, whether they hunt and fish or not, that's something that needs to be expressed. And I start our podcast off about intro that says the North American model of wildlife conservation is something that should be pedestalized by everyone because everyone benefits off of it, period. The antis benefit off of it. If we didn't do it so well, they wouldn't have anything to bitch about. If we were sitting there and putting it on a shelf of the preserve, they wouldn't have a business. They wouldn't have a job. They wouldn't have any social function to go to gripe and moan and groan and complain. They want it to go away, but the business side of the animal rights movement doesn't want it to go away because they would go belly up and broke. If there's not a catastrophic thing for them to support, what are they going to turn around and fight? Mm-hmm. They're not doing conservation work. We need to explain that to the general public about our message is the message because the other message is no message except for stop this, period. Mm-hmm. And people need to figure out a way to share that. Take a minute, turn around and do a little post, copy and paste, whatever you need to do, get that message out there because that's what will help on IP28. That's what will help on 302. That's what helped significantly on 127. And those are movements that we can make. If you don't want to contribute, if you don't want to turn around and move to Colorado and get registered to vote, if you just get the word out, just turn around and help spread the word because that helps build every single other aspect of this campaign up to the point where people say and see, I was additive of doing something that was monumental in the state of Colorado that then helped Oregon down the road or helped Washington down the road, and maybe it helps Canada down the road as well. But we need to do it together as sportsmen and women because we're the minority, but we have a chance to turn around and influence the majority to the point to where they come to our side and understand what we do as conservationists benefit them and their families and the wildlife resources and the habitat and the landscape more than they could ever imagine, thinking that we just go out and get a license and go kill stuff.
Well said. How do you feel? Obviously, you're confident it's going to be on the ballot. How do you feel about the success of the ballot initiative? Do you think there's a good chance that this will pass to get your 55%?
I think if I'm a bet man today, Now, what I would say is I bet on the Colorado Avalanche at the beginning of the year, and that didn't pan out, even though they were the best team in hockey. But this is a little bit different because this isn't players on the hockey rink. These are people's lives that you're messing with. I think that there's a really good chance that we beat this, that we win and beat the opposition by 55 to 65%. And I think that what's interesting is, and I need to say this, that I don't think we're going to lose. But if this failed by a 54% margin, okay, it didn't constitutionally get past muster, but the majority of Coloradans would support this. And if we just voted on wolves 6 years ago, and that was by 51.8%, if this passed by 54.5%, the majority would have spoken, and that's going to pay dividends to the legislators and to commissioners and governors, because the majority of the population supported the constitutional right to hunt and fish. Even though it didn't pass, it was still the majority. And if you look at 54.5, then you're looking at 50 or 46.5 on the other side. I mean, those are monumental numbers.
What was the number on 127, Dan?
55 to 45. If that was a constitutional amendment, we would have won.
So glass half full, absolutely. It's absolutely going to pass. That's the only way we need to,
I don't have a glass half full. I get smaller glasses and I just fill them up.
Yeah. Dan tends to be a little tiny bit glass half empty, but that's because he has so much more experience in all of this BS than we do. But Kyle, I really feel good about this. A combination of CRWM and IOTR. I wish you could have sat in on that meeting in Denver a few weeks ago. Wow. It was just really, to see people that are so passionate about it. It made me hopeful. And I'm very, very hopeful.
So on that note, Dan, where are we headed? So, we talk about the pendulum, right? And the pendulum swung quite a ways left, a little too far left than most of us are comfortable with, certainly around hunting and wildlife management. And what is the momentum, and where do we see ourselves 5 years from now? I hope you, after this ballot initiative, can retire from all the great work and just just say, hey, we've accomplished what we need to do. We're probably not there, but where do we see ourselves 5-10 years down the road? Obviously, this is never going to go away. It's never going to go back to where we were 40 or 50 years ago. But where are we headed? Are we in good shape, or are we in a lot of trouble?
No, I think that we're probably at a epic time in North American conservation, for Mexico, United States, and Canada. I think people are starting to pay attention not only to the resiliency of the conservation community, but the need for legitimate science-based conservation and management of our species and natural resources. As I mentioned, with 8 billion people on the planet, the populations are not going to continually go down people wise. And you have to be more nimble, and you have to be more thoughtful, and you have to be more conservation minded to make sure that all those pieces of the puzzle work. And, getting people to understand that we as humans are part of the ecosystem and that we are part of biodiversity. How can you not be when you got 8 billion of us on the planet that breed like rats? I mean, look at the population of foreign countries. Look at the population in the United States. They say it's going down, but we got 350 million people in this country. We have a tremendous amount of wildlife resources available to us, but it needs to be coddled and it needs to be effectively managed, because when people from the East just drive out here and see to the West, or in Canada, for an example, this vast open space compared to where they came from. And my God, it's just open, it's vast, and it's farming and ranching areas. And then look at the public lands. But not all of it is suitable for wildlife, and not all of it is suitable wildlife habitat. It's just open space. there might be some wildlife, maybe there's some lizards and maybe some mice and snakes and some different things in different parts, but it's not a conservation model open space to where you can turn around and have sustainable populations without some sort of human intervention. If we didn't have 8 billion people on the planet, maybe we wouldn't need all that stuff. But we do. And we have to figure out a way to turn around and put those pieces of the puzzle together. And I think as much as the animal rights community thinks that they've grown, I think a lot of it is the same bunch of individuals. I was going to say something else, but same bunch of individuals. I'm trying to be, it's your podcast, not mine. So I'm trying to be professional here. Same bunch of individuals that they're going to age out and they're going to get frustrated. And with more and more victories and our notches on our gun belt, I think community-wise, whether it's bighorn sheep, whether it's grizzly bears, whether it's elk, deer, coyotes, waterfowl, whatever, the conservation side of thing, that story is going to resonate better with a more educated general public on how we continue to do this for their kids and their grandkids and to make sure that things are sustainable in perpetuity. What argument do the antis have? What argument do the extremists have to stop it all? And is that going to be sustainable in perpetuity? Not with 8 billion people, not with 350 million people in the United States and however many Canucks you have up there in Canada. I mean, I think that there's a tremendous amount of education that can happen to that middle of the road to make educated decisions that are science-based and fact-driven by a small segment of the population that turns around and provides the funding and provides the resources for those managing agencies to be able to do what's necessary in conjunction with the conservation organizations that put boots on the ground, money, and work and dedication into that conservation model that, as I said in our podcast and our introductions, it's the most coveted, emulated, and recognized model on the planet because it works. And when you have so much opposition and they still have to go up something that works, it's kind of hard for them to be victorious. And I kind of equate it to the difference between good and evil. And I really believe that. I think that what we're doing is right. Our model has been proven. The opposition thinks that they know best and they're going to try to do whatever they're going to do, but they don't have a replacement. Mm-hmm. Their replacement is zero. It's rewilding. It's stop it all. It's not modify this or adapt that. It's not anything to make it better. It's just to stop it. Their number is 0, 0, 0. And that's proven in their ballot initiatives. That's proven in their petitions that they formulate. That's proven in their legislation. And I think that 5 or 10 or 15 years from now, you're probably going to see a change and a pendulum swing the other direction to where people are like, hey, wait a minute, enough is enough. How much of this bullcrap can we actually take? Look at all the stuff that they've done to try to do wrong. And then look at all the stuff that's been done that's right. And I want to make a comment real quick. And I know I'm long-winded and I answer your questions in thesis papers, and I apologize. But the thing, if you look historically, they keep talking about somewhere between 11 to 14 or 15 million sportsmen and women in the country, and that hunter numbers are going down. If you look at the numbers from the 1950s and 60s, there was roughly 11 to 15 million sportsmen and women there. It's cyclical because you got age outs, but there's replenishment and replacements. What we have is less percentage of the population engaged in those activities, but we still sell the same amount of licenses and have the same amount of participation. I think that that's worth mentioning regularly because while the animal rights community has grown nominally, the sportsman community has stayed the same over and over and over and over. And we're still a bigger majority of the minority than what the animal rights community is, because 94% of all people that live in this country recreate outdoors in some form or fashion, and still 93% are not vegans or vegetarians. And natural food and natural consumptive use and livestock production is part of all that consumptive use, and it goes into this whole ideological proponency of trying to make sure that what we do is for the benefit of all of it. But you and I and Jann and the other 349 million people in this country are part of all of it. And I think that once people start to recognize that when you attack me, you're attacking everybody else. And when I get attacked, I'm along with everybody else trying to figure out how to turn around and sustain what we have and make sure that 5 or 10 or 15 or 50 or 500 years from now, it still is there.
Yeah. Well said. Wow. So much stuff to dig into. And Dan, I appreciate your time today. Jann, is there anything else for the good of the order that we want to jump into before we let you guys get on with the rest of your day? I know you got a big event tonight, so.
Well, of course I have to give a little plug for One Campfire. This is exactly why we exist, is to educate that non-hunter on when it comes to, our rights, whether it's Colorado, Wyoming, British Columbia, Alberta. We have to stand up, and be supportive. And even if we're a non-hunter, that's where it happened on 127. It was the non-hunters that put us over, into the victory category. And that's what the purpose of One Campfire is to, we're an education-based social media program that, the hunters that are going to listen to this podcast may have never heard of. And that's because they are not our focus. Our focus is the housewife in, Penticton, or just a little pitch towards One Campfire, because we need that non-hunter for the CRWM, IOTR groups, for the Oregon groups. And I think the other thing is I love the respect that I feel like, we show. And I think the three of us, we all should be very proud of that. Don't get in the, privately we might say some things that are fairly inappropriate, but I think that that's how we're going to win this is, and you guys know me, positivity. And, but really that's going to make a difference.
Well, taking the high road, right? And, like Dan said, give us a better option. If you got a better option to our science-based wildlife management model and shutting down hunting and fishing, give us a better option. And so far, nobody's given us really any options. So, we have truth, and we have, I think that's probably a little bit arrogant on my part, but I believe that we have truth on our side. We have just, hundreds of years of, science-based wildlife management on our side to prove that that's the right thing. So, Dan, before we let you go, and again, thanks so much for taking the time today. And I know we've gone long here, but for people to support, to follow, you talked about sharing, any funding stuff. What can people do? Where do they need to go? How do they support the movement?
Well, I appreciate that. You can go to SaveTheHuntColorado.com, which is the CRWM website. And if you're really compelled to turn around and buy something with my face on it, you can get a hoodie or a T-shirt that my wife and a couple of our board members designed. I'm not an advocate of wearing that myself, but we've got a bunch of swag on there if you want to promote. And there's a lot of stuff to promote the constitutional right to hunt and fish as well. There's donations that you can give on that to help support our efforts. You can also go to savecoheritage.org, which is the website for the constitutional right to hunt and fish with IOTR. And I encourage anybody to look up the International Order of T. Roosevelt, who is our partner on this and leading the surface to air missiles and the aerial assault. They've tasked us with the ground game on this stuff and given us a pretty good level of support to be able to turn around and make sure we can put this across the finish line. So savecoheritage.org. For the IOTR side of the campaign, if you just want to turn around and look and see what CRWM is doing and how you might be able to formulate a 501c4 or something that is compatible for whatever province or whatever state that you live in, you can go to SaveTheHuntColorado.com. And then I'd be stupid if I didn't recognize the fact that you can follow us on Instagram and Facebook at CRWM for Instagram and the Coloradans for Responsible Wildlife Management on Facebook. And then we would encourage you, like this podcast, to look into Through the Gates podcast. We just released our 103rd episode in a year and a half. And we've got some fantastic guests coming up, including Ryan Callahan with Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, and Will Primos from Primos Hunting Calls and Systems. And we just had the gubernatorial candidates, and we got Jason Matzinger coming on. We've been very fortunate to get the support from the community. Jann's been on our podcast earlier in our first term last year in 2025. And just like I say, subscribe and follow and share and let people know that there's things out there that they can benefit off of. And sometimes the hunting community is unaware of a lot of these things that go on, but I guarantee that the non-hunting community, the one that we need to hit regularly, they need to hear this message just as much. And on a final note, I would say, Kyle, is if you're not registered to vote, and I don't care what state you're in, if you're not registered to vote, get registered to vote, because people are making decisions on your behalf, whether you put them there or not, and they need to know who you are. And if for a person that doesn't think that one vote matters, stop and think that if 100,000 people think just like you because they're not registered to vote, well, that 100,000 really matters. And there's a hell of a lot of people out there that think like that. And we need to change that mentality, especially on the conservation and sportsman side. So I just appreciate the opportunity. Like I say, I'll be in British Columbia next week at the Outdoorsman and Conservation Festival in Squamish, British Columbia. And depending on when your podcast airs, maybe they might know about it and go to it. And if it's after that, well, then plan on going next year and look it up online. And because we're going there to speak. They asked us to go present, and which is cool because, my wife says, I don't know why people want to listen to you so much, because I've listened to you for 38 years. So they just haven't been around you enough to turn around and shut you up and tell you to shut the hell up. So.
Well, in 38 years, we can make that decision whether we've heard enough. So, but until then, keep talking. And just to shout out to the Outdoor Conservation Festival, Wild Sheep Society BC is a sponsor of that event, and great to see. I'd love to be there, Dan, and sadly, I just my travel schedule's been insane, so I'm going to miss out on it. But yeah, and we're going to try and drop this right away. So hopefully, I know there's still tickets available. Travis is doing a great job of that event, and really excited to have you come up to Canada and represent. Hunters and conservationists and science-based wildlife management believers. So, Dan, again, thank you so much. Jann, always a pleasure and so grateful for all you do. And 100% we will share this out and really appreciate everything. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.